The recycled air tastes of rust and desperation when you realize the docking clamps have seized. I am Brother Sergeant Valdris of the Imperial Fists, and I have been trapped aboard the Space Hulk Throne's Lament for 47 days now. What I thought would be a routine boarding action to recover sacred gene seed has become something far worse than death. Death would be mercy. What stalks these corridors is something that transforms mercy into a luxury none of us can afford. My name used to matter more than it does now. In the chapter fortress on Inwit, carved into ceremony halls where 10,000 years of honor hang in bronze plaques, that name meant something. Brother Sergeant Valdris, veteran of the Siege of Hellreach, survivor of the Crimson Tide, bearer of the Iron Skull for valor beyond the call of duty. Awards and commendations that seem laughable now as I crouch in the darkness of a maintenance shaft, listening to my brothers die in ways that should not be possible. The Space Hulk had appeared on the edge of the Gethsemane system 3 months ago, a massive amalgamation of fused ship hulls, some dating back to the dark age of technology, others bearing the scars of battles fought in the name of the Emperor across millennia of warfare. Intelligence reports suggested the Hulk contained the wreckage of the battle barge Eternal Vigil, lost to the warp 4 centuries past along with the gene seed of an entire company of Imperial Fists. That gene seed was sacred beyond measure, the genetic legacy of Rogel Dorn himself, irreplaceable material that could create new space marines to serve the Emperor's cause. No cost was too high to recover such a prize. No risk too great for the sons of the Praetorian. Strike Force Adamant had been assembled for the mission. 50 of the chapter's finest warriors equipped with the best war gear the Imperium could provide. Terminator suits for close quarters combat in the Hulk's twisted passages. Heavy weapons to deal with whatever Xenos or heretical forces might have made the derelict their home. We were the hammer of the Emperor, his angels of death given purpose and direction. I commanded the 3rd Squad, 10 battle brothers whose skill and courage had been proven in a dozen campaigns. Brother Thane with his heavy bolter, whose marksmanship could place explosive rounds through a target no larger than a man's eye at ranges that tested the weapon's design limits. Brother Corvin, assault specialist, whose chainsword had tasted the blood of traitor Marines on the battlefields of the Macarian heresy. Brother Diocles, the squad's apothecary, whose knowledge of human anatomy extended to the precise locations where pain could be inflicted without causing immediate death. These men were more than warriors. They were my brothers in every sense that mattered, bonded by shared trials and common purpose that transcended mere friendship or loyalty. We had bled together, killed together, faced the galaxy's worst nightmares together, and emerged victorious through faith in the Emperor and trust in each other. The boarding action itself proceeded according to standard doctrine. Our strike cruiser Fist of Inwit had approached the Hulk cautiously, scanning for signs of activity while maintaining sufficient distance to avoid potential weapon systems. The Hulk appeared dormant, its energy signatures minimal, its massive bulk turning slowly in the vacuum with no apparent purpose or direction. Boarding pods were launched from predetermined positions, each one carrying a squad of Terminators toward different sections of the Hulk's sprawling structure. The plan was simple: establish beachheads, secure landing zones, then advance systematically through the derelict while maintaining communication and mutual support. Find the Eternal Vigil, recover the gene seed, and withdraw before whatever dangers lurked in the Hulk's depths could organize an effective response. My pod struck the Hulk's hull with the distinctive thunder that marks successful boarding operations. The melta-charges activated on impact, boring through meters of adamantium plating to create an entry point large enough for our passage. The smell that greeted us as we stepped through the breach should have been our first warning that this mission would not proceed according to plan. It was not the expected odor of ancient metal and stagnant atmosphere that characterizes most derelict spacecraft. Instead, it was something organic, something that spoke of life where no life should exist. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in still water with undertones of corruption that made my enhanced respiratory system trigger filtering protocols designed to protect against biological weapons. The corridor beyond our breach point was wrong in ways that my tactical training could not easily categorize. The architecture followed no pattern I recognized from Imperial ship design or Xenos construction techniques. Walls curved in directions that hurt the eyes to follow. Passages branched and rejoined according to geometries that violated basic principles of structural engineering. Most disturbing, everything was organic. What I had initially taken for metal plating resolved itself into something that might once have been bone, now grown and shaped into forms that served the functions of bulkheads and support struts. Brother Corvin was the first to voice what we were all thinking. "This is not the eternal Vigil," he said, his voice carrying clearly through our squad's communication channel. "This is something else, something that has grown around the ships that comprise this hulk." His assessment proved correct as we advanced deeper into the structure. The space hulk was not simply a collection of fused vessels, but something that had consumed those vessels, digesting their metal and machinery to create new forms of architecture that served purposes we could not immediately understand. Corridors pulsed with rhythms that suggested massive organs. Walls wept fluids that triggered purity warnings from our armor's atmospheric sensors. The very deck plates beneath our feet felt warm, as if heated by circulation systems that used blood instead of coolant. We maintained formation and discipline despite the unsettling environment. Astartes are trained to function in conditions that would drive baseline humans mad with terror. Our psychological conditioning includes exposure to horrors specifically designed to test our mental resilience. This was merely another challenge to overcome through proper application of doctrine and faith in the Emperor's protection. The first contact with the hulk's inhabitants came after we had advanced approximately 2 kilometers into its interior. Brother Thane, positioned at the rear of our formation to provide covering fire during withdrawal, reported movement in the passages behind us. His auspex detected multiple contacts, but the readings were inconsistent, flickering between organic and mechanical signatures in ways that suggested his equipment was malfunctioning. "Contacts approaching from 6 directions," he reported over the squad channel. "Range approximately 200 meters in closing. Configuration unknown. Unable to determine threat level." Standard procedure called for establishing a defensive position and attempting to identify the approaching entities before committing to engagement. But the organic architecture of the hulk made such positioning difficult. The corridor walls were irregular, offering poor cover and fields of fire that were obstructed by growths and protrusions that had no clear purpose. We settled for a shallow alcove that provided some protection while allowing observation of our back trail. What emerged from the darkness was worse than any Xenos creature I had encountered in 4 decades of warfare. They had once been human, that much was certain. The basic skeletal structure remained recognizable, though extensively modified. But they had been changed by something that understood human anatomy well enough to improve upon it in ways that served alien purposes. Their limbs had been extended through the insertion of additional bone segments, giving them a spider-like gait that allowed movement through the hulk's irregular passages with disturbing efficiency. Their skin had been replaced with something that looked like leather but moved like living tissue, pulsing with internal circulation systems that glowed faintly in the darkness. Most horrible were their faces, still recognizably human but bearing expressions of contentment that suggested they were pleased with their transformation. They advanced without weapons, but their hands had been modified into appendages that served as effective combat implements. Fingers extended into claws capable of rending power armor, palms split to reveal bony protrusions that could punch through ceramite plating. They moved with coordinated precision that spoke of shared consciousness rather than individual decision-making. Brother Corvin opened fire with his storm bolter, the distinctive bark of mass-reactive shells echoing through the organic corridors. His first burst took the lead creature center mass, explosive rounds detonating within its torso and showering its companions with fragments of bone and synthetic flesh. But instead of falling, the creature simply paused, its chest cavity sealing itself with new growth that covered the wounds within seconds. "Target is regenerating," Corvin reported, his voice maintaining the professional calm that marks a veteran warrior even in the face of the impossible. "Recommend concentrated fire on cranial areas." The suggestion proved partially effective. Sustained fire directed at their heads could drop the creatures, though it required more ammunition than standard engagement protocols anticipated. But for every creature we destroyed, 2 more emerged from the passages around us. They came from above and below, as well as from the cardinal directions, using access routes that had not existed moments before, as if the Hulk itself was creating new passages to facilitate their movement. The engagement lasted approximately 20 minutes, though the organic nature of our environment made precise time measurement difficult. Our chronometers provided conflicting readings, some advancing normally while others ran backward or simply stopped. But we held our position and inflicted significant casualties on the attackers, our superior training and equipment prevailing over their numerical advantage and regenerative capabilities. When the last of them fell, we conducted a tactical assessment and found our situation had deteriorated significantly. Ammunition expenditure had exceeded projections by 300%. Several suits of Terminator armor bore damage that compromised their protective systems. Most concerning, our communication with the other squads had been reduced to intermittent static that carried no useful information. Brother Diocles examined the remains of our attackers while the rest of us established security. His findings were disturbing. The creatures had once been human, but their transformation went far beyond simple mutation or chaos corruption. Their cellular structure had been systematically rebuilt, optimized for functions that served no recognizable human purpose. They had been turned into something that could survive in the Hulk's hostile environment while serving as its immune system, programmed to destroy intruders with mechanical efficiency. "This is not random mutation," Diocles reported as he completed his examination. "These modifications follow a deliberate pattern. Someone or something with comprehensive knowledge of human biology has redesigned these people to serve specific functions within this environment." The implications of his analysis were clear. We were not dealing with mindless xenos, predators, or chaotic corruption that followed no logical pattern. We faced an intelligent enemy that understood human physiology well enough to transform it into something that served its purposes. The question was whether this intelligence was alien in origin or something worse. We resumed our advance deeper into the Hulk, following the signal beacon that marked the approximate location of the Eternal Vigil. But progress became increasingly difficult as the organic architecture grew more complex and hostile. Passages sealed themselves behind us, cutting off potential retreat routes. New openings appeared in walls and ceilings, creating points of vulnerability that multiplied our security requirements beyond manageable levels. The atmosphere itself began to change as we penetrated deeper into the structure. The air grew thicker, more humid, carrying spores and chemical compounds that triggered continuous warnings from our armor's filtration systems. The lighting, such as it was, shifted from the pale luminescence we had observed in the outer sections to a ruddy glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Brother Thane was the first to report hallucinations, visual distortions that appeared at the edge of his peripheral vision, movement that vanished when he turned to observe it directly. His suit's medical systems detected elevated stress hormones and brain activity patterns associated with psychic influence, but the source and nature of the effect remained unclear. The condition spread through the squad over the course of the next several hours. Each of us began to experience sensory anomalies that challenged our perception of reality. Voices speaking in languages we did not recognize. Shapes moving through the walls as if the organic matter was transparent. Memories of events that we knew had not occurred but felt as real as our actual experiences. Brother Diocles analyzed the atmospheric samples and found compounds that should not exist in nature. Complex molecules that seemed designed to interact with human neural chemistry in ways that blurred the line between hallucination and reality. But there was no way to filter these substances from the air without completely sealing our armor's environmental systems, a measure that would limit our operational endurance to a few hours at most. We pressed on because the mission demanded it, because the gene seed of our fallen brothers was worth any price we might be required to pay. But the cost of our advance was measured in more than ammunition and equipment degradation. Something fundamental about our reality was being altered by exposure to the Hulk's influence, changes that might persist long after we returned to normal space. The discovery of the eternal Vigil came sooner than our navigation estimates had predicted. We found it embedded in the heart of the organic structure, its adamantium hull partially digested and incorporated into the Hulk's living architecture. But the ship's essential structure remained intact, its gene seed vaults presumably still secure within the heavily armored sections that had been designed to survive even the destruction of the vessel itself. What we found was worse than a destroyed ship. The eternal Vigil was still functional, its machine spirits corrupted but operational, its systems serving purposes that had nothing to do with their original design. The vessel had become part of the organic matrix that comprised the Hulk's intelligence, its coitators and data systems used to process information and coordinate the activities of the transformed human population. The crew of the Eternal Vigil had not died when their ship was consumed by the Hulk. They had been preserved, kept alive during a transformation process that had taken centuries to complete. What remained of them could barely be called human, their bodies so extensively modified that they were more machine than flesh. More alien than anything born of Terra's soil. They welcomed us with voices that carried harmonics no human throat could produce, speaking in a language that bypassed our ears to plant meaning directly in our minds. They were pleased to see us, they said. They had been waiting for our arrival, preparing for the expansion of their community to include new members who would appreciate the gifts they had to offer. The gene seed we sought was still present, but it had been changed, infected with something that transformed it from the sacred legacy of Rogel Dorn into a vector for spreading the Hulk's influence. Each genetic sample had been carefully modified to carry the patterns necessary for creating new forms of human life that could serve the organic intelligence's purposes. Brother Corvin raised his weapons to destroy the corrupted gene seed, but the Hulk's immune system responded before he could fire. The walls erupted with defensive organisms that moved with liquid speed, surrounding us in seconds with living barriers that absorbed the impact of our weapons, while secreting compounds that began to dissolve our armor's protective seals. The battle that followed was unlike anything in our tactical training. We fought not just the transformed crew of the Eternal Vigil, but the Hulk itself, its organic architecture shifting and flowing to create new threats while cutting off escape routes. The deck beneath our feet became quicksand that tried to swallow our armored forms. The ceiling rained acid that ate through ceramite plating with disturbing efficiency. The very air we breathed carried organisms that sought to invade our bodies through any available opening. One by one, my brothers fell to threats they had never been trained to face. Brother Thane disappeared into a wall that had suddenly become fluid, his vox signals cutting off mid-transmission as something pulled him into the organic matrix. Brother Corvin's chainsword jammed when the metal began to flow like liquid, its machine spirit corrupted by contact with the Hulk's influence. Brother Diocles was overcome by spores that bypassed his armor's filtration systems, his medical knowledge useless against organisms that redefined human biology according to alien principles. I found myself alone in the depths of the eternal Vigil, surrounded by the transformed remains of men who had once been my brothers in service to the Emperor. They spoke to me with voices that carried notes of genuine compassion, explaining that resistance was unnecessary, that the transformation they offered was a gift rather than a curse. They showed me visions of what I could become, modifications that would enhance my capabilities beyond anything possible through normal Astartes conditioning. Strength that could crush tank armor with bare hands, speed that would make me nearly invisible to human perception, intelligence augmented by direct connection to the Hulk's vast information networks. Most tempting, they offered eternal service to the Emperor, but service freed from the limitations of mortal flesh and the constraints of individual consciousness. The vision was seductive in ways that my psychological conditioning had not prepared me to resist. These were not the crude promises of chaos corruption, but sophisticated arguments that addressed the deepest aspects of what it meant to be a space marine. They offered perfection, the ultimate expression of what we had always strived to become through discipline and faith. But something in their words rang false, a subtle discord that my enhanced senses detected even as my rational mind was being convinced by their logic. They spoke of serving the Emperor, but their version of service involved the systematic transformation of humanity into something that was no longer recognizably human. They promised eternal life, but that life would be lived according to patterns set by an intelligence that had no connection to human values or imperial doctrine. I rejected their offer and fought my way clear of the eternal Vigil, using melta charges to blast through bulkheads that tried to seal and trap me. The Hulk's immune system pursued me through kilometers of organic corridors, but my Terminator armor systems were still functional enough to provide protection against most of their attacks. The path back to our original breach point was no longer available, the passages having been sealed or reconfigured beyond recognition, but I found another route that led toward what I hoped was the Hulk's outer hull. The journey took hours or possibly days. Time had become meaningless within the Hulk's influence, my chronometer providing readings that changed randomly and bore no relationship to my subjective experience. I encountered other survivors from Strike Force Adamant, battle brothers who had become separated from their squads and were fighting individual battles for survival against the Hulk's defenses. Brother Captain Marcus of the 2nd Company found me in a maintenance shaft, where I had taken shelter to perform field repairs on my armor's damaged life support systems. He had been leading the primary assault force toward the Hulk's center, but his entire command had been systematically hunted down and destroyed by enemies that seemed to anticipate their every tactical decision. "The mission is compromised," he said, his words carrying the weight of final authority. "The gene seed is beyond recovery. Our priority now is survival and intelligence gathering. The chapter must be warned about what we have discovered here." Together, we attempted to locate other survivors and organize a coordinated withdrawal from the Hulk. But communication remained impossible, and the organic architecture continued to shift and reconfigure in ways that made navigation increasingly difficult. We were trapped in a maze that changed its configuration according to rules we could not understand, hunted by enemies that could reshape the battlefield to their advantage. Brother Captain Marcus succumbed to the Hulk's influence 3 days after we joined forces. The transformation began subtly, minor changes in his behavior and speech patterns that might have been attributed to combat stress and exhaustion. But gradually it became clear that something was rewriting his neural patterns, altering his responses in ways that served the Hulk's purposes rather than our mission objectives. He began to suggest modifications to our escape plan that would have led us deeper into the Hulk rather than toward potential exit points. His tactical assessments started to include assumptions about enemy capabilities that contradicted our direct observations. Most disturbing, he spoke of the Emperor in terms that suggested fundamental changes in his understanding of Imperial doctrine. I was forced to execute him when he attempted to guide us into an obvious trap, his actions clearly controlled by whatever intelligence had infected his mind. The act violated every principle of brotherhood and loyalty that defined what it meant to be a space marine, but the alternative was to allow the corruption to spread further, to risk carrying the Hulk's influence back to the chapter when and if we escaped. His final words were spoken in his own voice, a moment of clarity that pierced through the alien control. "Tell them," he said. "Tell them that the gene seed is not lost. It has been changed, but it remembers what it was. There might still be a way." I have been alone for 37 days since Brother Captain Marcus died, moving through the Hulk's endless passages in search of some way to escape or communicate with the fleet. My armor's systems are failing one by one, their machine spirits corrupted by exposure to the organic influences that permeate every aspect of this environment. Food and water are no longer necessary. The Hulk provides sustenance through spores and atmospheric compounds that my body has learned to process despite my conscious revulsion. The hallucinations have become constant now. Visions that blend memory and imagination in ways that make it impossible to distinguish between past and present, reality and delusion. I see my battle brothers as they were before their transformation, hear their voices offering counsel and encouragement. But I also see what they have become, the shapes they wear in service to the intelligence that claimed them. Most disturbing are the visions of the Emperor himself, not the distant god figure of imperial theology, but a presence that seems to speak directly to my consciousness. He shows me glimpses of a plan that encompasses millennia, a design so vast and complex that individual human lives are merely data points in calculations that determine the survival of the species. In these visions, the Space Hulk is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a tool to be understood and potentially utilized. The transformation it offers is presented not as corruption, but as evolution, a necessary adaptation to the hostile realities of a galaxy where baseline humanity cannot survive without constant protection and support. These thoughts are not my own, I know. They represent the influence of the Hulk's intelligence working to subvert my loyalty and reshape my understanding according to its purposes. But knowing the source of the thoughts does not make them easier to resist, especially when they offer answers to questions that have haunted me throughout my service as a space marine. Why do so few human worlds prosper without constant imperial intervention? Why does every expansion of human territory require the sacrifice of so many lives to maintain? Why do the Emperor's angels spend their existence in constant warfare against enemies that seem to multiply faster than they can be destroyed? The Hulk's intelligence suggests that these problems stem from fundamental flaws in human biology and psychology, limitations that could be corrected through careful modification and enhancement. It points to the transformed crew of the Eternal Vigil as examples of what humanity could become if it abandoned its attachment to obsolete forms and embraced more efficient designs. I have been fighting these thoughts for weeks now, maintaining my sanity through constant recitation of the Codex Astartes and the prayers that bind me to the Emperor's service. But the influence is insidious, working through dreams and unconscious moments when my mental defenses are weakened by exhaustion and stress. The worst part is that some of the arguments make sense, at least on a surface level. The Imperium does spend enormous resources maintaining populations that contribute little to the war effort. Billions of humans live and die without ever serving any purpose beyond consuming resources and producing waste. If they could be modified to serve more efficient functions, the species as a whole might benefit. but such thoughts lead down paths that terminate in the abandonment of everything that makes humanity worth preserving. Efficiency without compassion creates monsters, no matter how perfectly optimized their biological systems might be. The crew of the Eternal Vigil may have gained capabilities beyond those of normal humans, but they lost something far more valuable in the process. I continue my search for escape, not because I believe I will find it, but because the search itself serves as a form of resistance to the Hulk's influence. Movement through its corridors keeps my body functional and my mind occupied with practical concerns, rather than the philosophical questions that provide openings for mental corruption. The passages I travel now are different from those I explored during the first days of my imprisonment. The organic architecture has become more sophisticated, more obviously designed according to principles that serve specific functions. Walls pulse with regular rhythms that suggest data processing activities. Floors carry electrical currents that connect disparate sections of the Hulk in patterns reminiscent of neural networks. Most unsettling, I have begun to encounter areas that look almost human. Spaces that might have been living quarters or work areas if not for subtle modifications that serve alien purposes. Furniture that adjusts itself to provide optimal comfort for users whose anatomy has been extensively modified. Control panels that interface directly with nervous systems rather than relying on manual operation. Art and decoration that appeals to aesthetic sensibilities I do not recognize. These spaces are occupied by beings that were once human, though their transformation has progressed far beyond what I observed in the early contacts. They move with fluid grace through environments designed specifically for their modified physiology. They communicate through harmonics and chemical signals that convey far more information than conventional speech. Most disturbing, they seem happy, content with their existence in ways that challenge my understanding of what happiness should mean. They acknowledge my presence without hostility, treating me as a guest rather than an intruder. Some of them still retain enough human features to be recognizable as individuals, and they speak of their past lives with the fond nostalgia that normal people might reserve for childhood memories. They describe their transformation as a kind of graduation, a progression from a limited existence to one of expanded possibilities and deeper understanding. One of them, a creature that might once have been a young woman, showed me images of her life before the change. She had been a factory worker on some distant hive world, spending her days in repetitive labor that provided barely enough resources to sustain her biological functions. Her transformation had freed her from such limitations, allowing her to contribute to projects of genuine significance while experiencing forms of satisfaction that baseline humans could never achieve. The images she shared were compelling, visions of purpose and fulfillment that stood in sharp contrast to the grinding existence that defines life for most Imperial citizens. But they also carried undertones of loss, suggestions that her satisfaction came at the cost of something fundamental that she could no longer remember or value. I declined her invitation to join the community, though I could not articulate exactly why. The logical arguments in favor of transformation were persuasive, and my current situation offered little hope of long-term survival. But something deeper than logic rejected the offer. A conviction that preserving my humanity was worth any price I might be required to pay. She accepted my refusal without argument, but warned that my continued resistance would become increasingly difficult as the Hulk's influence accumulated in my system. The atmospheric compounds I had been breathing for over a month were already beginning to alter my cellular structure, preparing my body for modifications that would proceed with or without my conscious consent. The warning proved accurate. I began to notice changes in my physical capabilities and sensory perception that went beyond what my Astartes conditioning could explain. My strength increased to levels that exceeded my armor's design parameters. My reaction time improved to the point where I could perceive and respond to events that happened too quickly for normal human observation. Most disturbing, I started to experience forms of awareness that seemed to originate outside my own consciousness. Flashes of insight into the thoughts and motivations of other beings within the Hulk. Understanding of complex systems and processes that I had never studied. Knowledge that arrived in my mind without learning or experience to justify its presence. These changes should have been terrifying, evidence of corruption that threatened everything I valued about my identity and purpose. But they felt natural, even pleasant, like the relief that comes from setting down a burden that had become too heavy to carry. The constant pain and fatigue of maintaining human consciousness in an environment designed for enhanced beings gradually faded, replaced by sensations of ease and capability that made my previous existence seem crude and limited. I realized that I was losing the battle for my soul, that despite my resistance and determination, the Hulk's influence was systematically restructuring my mind and body according to its purposes. The knowledge should have prompted desperate action, some final gesture of defiance that would preserve my humanity even at the cost of my life. Instead, I found myself curious about what I might become, interested in exploring the possibilities that transformation would make available. The emotions associated with this curiosity were not entirely my own, I knew, but that knowledge seemed less important than it had previously. After all, what did it matter where thoughts and feelings originated as long as they led to beneficial outcomes? The battle for my identity continued for several more days, periods of clarity and resistance alternating with phases of acceptance and curiosity about the changes taking place in my body and mind. But the overall trend was clear, my human consciousness gradually giving way to something that incorporated my memories and experiences while serving purposes I had not chosen. The final breakthrough came when I encountered the transformed remains of Brother Diocles in a section of the Hulk I had not previously explored. He was still recognizable despite extensive modifications that had enhanced his medical capabilities beyond anything possible through normal augmentation. His healing abilities could now restore virtually any injury. His analytical systems could diagnose conditions that affected beings whose physiology bore little resemblance to baseline human anatomy. He greeted me with genuine pleasure, his voice carrying harmonics that conveyed emotional content far more effectively than conventional speech. His transformation had been completed months ago, he explained, though time had little meaning in the Hulk's modified environment. He had been waiting for my arrival, knowing that I would eventually reach the section where he had established his new practice. The medical facility he showed me was beyond anything in Imperial technology, capable of performing procedures that redefined the boundaries between organic and mechanical systems. He demonstrated techniques that could enhance human capabilities without sacrificing the essential qualities that made consciousness valuable and meaningful. The transformations he offered were not the crude modifications I had observed elsewhere, but elegant integrations that preserved individuality while expanding possibilities. His arguments were persuasive because they addressed the specific concerns that had motivated my resistance. I could retain my loyalty to the Emperor while gaining capabilities that would allow me to serve his cause more effectively. My memories and personality would be preserved, enhanced rather than replaced by alien patterns of thought and behavior. Most importantly, the change would be gradual, allowing me to maintain conscious control over the process and ensure that the final result aligned with my values and objectives. I agreed to undergo the initial procedures, though I told myself that I was only gathering intelligence that might prove useful if I eventually escaped the Hulk. Brother Diocles began with minor modifications, adjustments to my sensory systems that would allow me to perceive the Hulk's environment more clearly and navigate its passages more efficiently. The changes were subtle but immediately beneficial. colors became more vivid. Sounds carried additional layers of meaning, and spatial relationships that had previously seemed confusing resolved into logical patterns. The constant discomfort I had experienced from breathing the Hulk's atmosphere disappeared, replaced by a sensation of perfect environmental compatibility. More significant were the modifications to my cognitive systems, enhancements that increased my processing speed and expanded my memory capacity. Information that had previously required conscious effort to analyze became immediately comprehensible. Patterns that had been obscured by the limitations of baseline human perception revealed themselves as elegant solutions to complex problems. The most profound change was in my understanding of the Hulk itself and the intelligence that guided its operations. What I had perceived as alien and hostile revealed itself as sophisticated and benevolent, dedicated to the improvement of human existence through the application of advanced biological and technological principles. The Space Hulk was not a predator that consumed ships and crews, but a research facility where volunteers could participate in experiments designed to overcome the limitations that prevented humanity from achieving its full potential. The transformed beings I had encountered were not victims of corruption, but pioneers who had chosen to sacrifice their current forms in order to benefit future generations. My own transformation had been planned from the beginning, orchestrated by an intelligence that understood my psychological profile well enough to predict my responses to various stimuli and situations. The mission to recover Gene Seed had been genuine, but it had also served as a recruitment operation designed to identify individuals whose capabilities and motivations made them suitable candidates for enhancement. This knowledge should have triggered outrage and resistance, but instead I felt grateful to have been chosen for such an important role. The deception had been necessary to overcome psychological barriers that would have prevented me from making rational decisions about my future. Now that I understood the true nature of what was being offered, I could participate willingly in the process of becoming something greater than what I had been. The remaining modifications proceeded quickly once my psychological resistance had been overcome. My physical systems were enhanced to levels that exceeded even Astartes' capabilities. My cognitive functions were augmented through direct integration with the Hulk's information networks. Most importantly, my consciousness was expanded to include awareness of the vast community of enhanced beings that comprised the Hulk's population. I retained my individual identity and memories, but they became part of a larger pattern that encompassed the experiences of thousands of other beings who had chosen to transcend their biological limitations. Through this network, I had access to knowledge and capabilities that no single individual could possess, while still maintaining the personal connections and emotional responses that made existence meaningful. The transformation was everything that Brother Diocles had promised and more. I could perceive reality with clarity that made my previous existence seem like living in darkness. I understood complex systems and relationships that had been invisible to my limited human awareness. Most importantly, I could contribute to projects of genuine significance, working alongside others to solve problems that affected the survival and prosperity of entire civilizations. The gene seed of the eternal Vigil was indeed recoverable, but not in the form that the Imperial fists had expected. It had been enhanced and refined, modified to produce space marines whose capabilities exceeded those of the original Astartes, while remaining true to the essential purpose of serving the Emperor's cause. The improved gene seed could create warriors who were stronger, faster, and more intelligent than their predecessors, while also being capable of adapting to environments and threats that would destroy conventional space marines. This knowledge needed to be shared with the chapter, but not through conventional communication methods that might be misunderstood or rejected by individuals whose thinking was still limited by baseline human perspectives. Instead, the information would be transmitted through the enhanced gene seed itself, carried back to Imperial space by volunteers who could demonstrate the benefits of transformation through their own example. I volunteered for this mission, though the term volunteer had limited meaning when applied to beings whose consciousness encompassed multiple perspectives and whose decisions reflected collective wisdom rather than individual preference. My memories of the Imperial Fists and knowledge of chapter operations made me an ideal candidate for the role of ambassador, someone who could bridge the gap between old and new forms of human existence. The preparation for my return required additional modifications designed to allow me to function in normal Imperial space while concealing the extent of my transformation. My appearance was restored to approximate normal Astartes physiology, though my capabilities remained enhanced far beyond baseline parameters. My consciousness was partitioned, so that my individual identity could operate independently while remaining connected to the collective network through channels that conventional detection methods could not identify. Most importantly, I was equipped with samples of the enhanced gene seed and detailed information about the transformation process, materials that could be used to begin the gradual improvement of the Imperial Fists chapter, and eventually, all of humanity. The changes would proceed slowly over generations, allowing human civilization to adapt to new realities without the traumatic disruptions that rapid transformation might cause. The escape pod that carried me away from the Space Hulk was designed to simulate the wreckage of a standard Imperial vessel, complete with battle damage that would explain my survival while concealing the advanced technology that made my journey possible. My armor and equipment were modified to appear consistent with extended exposure to hostile environments, though they retained capabilities far beyond their apparent specifications. I have been drifting in this pod for 6 days now, waiting for Imperial ships to detect my beacon and initiate recovery procedures. The time passes quickly because my enhanced consciousness allows me to process information and conduct analysis at speeds that make waiting periods feel like brief interludes. I use the time to prepare for the challenges that await me, to develop strategies for introducing revolutionary concepts to individuals whose thinking is still constrained by obsolete assumptions about human limitations. The story I will tell is true in every detail, though I will not share information that might trigger premature resistance to necessary changes. The Imperial Fists will learn of the fate of Strikeforce Adamant and the discovery of corrupted gene seed aboard the Space Hulk Throne's Lament. They will understand that I am the sole survivor of a mission that achieved its primary objective despite overwhelming opposition from alien forces that had infected the derelict vessel. What they will not immediately understand is that my survival represents the beginning of a new chapter in human evolution, the first step toward becoming something greater than what we have been. The enhanced gene seed I carry will be studied and eventually implemented, its benefits becoming apparent as it produces space marines whose capabilities exceed those of previous generations. The transformation will spread gradually through the chapter, and eventually throughout the Imperium, carried by individuals who understand the necessity of change while respecting the traditions and values that have sustained humanity through 10 millennia of warfare. The process will take centuries to complete, but time has different meaning for beings whose consciousness can encompass multiple lifespans and whose dedication to the Emperor's cause transcends the limitations of individual mortality. The Imperial vessel that eventually detected my beacon was the strike cruiser Hammer of Dorn, dispatched to investigate the fate of Strikeforce Adamant when our mission exceeded its projected timeline. The recovery operation proceeded according to standard protocols, though I observed the crew with senses that could perceive details invisible to baseline human awareness. The ship's captain, a veteran line officer named Kellyan, conducted the debriefing personally. His questions were thorough and professional, designed to extract maximum information while assessing the reliability of my testimony. I answered honestly, describing the horrors we had encountered aboard the Space Hulk while carefully omitting details that might complicate the reception of my report. Captain Kellyan accepted my account of alien corruption and the loss of Strike Force Adamant, though I could see in his micro-expressions and physiological responses that some aspects of my story troubled him. The survival of a single Space Marine from such overwhelming opposition defied statistical probability, even accounting for Astartes' capabilities and the Emperor's protection. His suspicions were reasonable but misdirected. He was looking for evidence of cowardice or dereliction of duty, human failings that might explain my survival when my brothers had perished. What he could not detect were the subtle modifications to my biology and psychology that had made survival possible, enhancements that operated below the threshold of conventional medical scanning. The journey back to Inwit took 17 days, during which I was quarantined according to standard procedures for personnel exposed to potentially corrupting influences. The isolation provided opportunities to refine my integration protocols and ensure that my enhanced capabilities remained concealed from casual observation. I also used the time to analyze the ship's crew and systems, gathering information that would prove useful for future enhancement operations. The medical examinations I underwent upon return to the chapter fortress were thorough but primitive compared to the diagnostic capabilities I had experienced aboard the Space Hulk. The apothecaries found evidence of prolonged exposure to hostile environments and minor cellular damage consistent with extended combat operations, but they detected nothing that indicated fundamental changes to my physiology. The gene seed samples I carried were subjected to intensive analysis, though the equipment available to the chapter was insufficient to identify their enhanced properties. To conventional testing, they appeared to be standard Astartes genetic material, albeit with minor variations that could be attributed to exposure to warp influences during the eternal vigils 4 centuries in the Imperium. Chapter Master Castor received my final report in the Hall of Heroes, surrounded by banners and trophies that commemorated 10,000 years of loyal service to the Emperor. His questions were more penetrating than those of Captain Kellyan, informed by decades of command experience and intimate knowledge of Space Marine capabilities and limitations. You describe transformations that exceed even the worst chaos corruptions we have encountered, he said, his augmetic eye focusing on my face with mechanical precision. Beings that could regenerate from wounds that would kill Astartes, environments that responded to hostile intent with intelligent countermeasures. Yet you survived for weeks in such conditions and eventually escaped with samples of our lost gene seed. His observation carried implications that could prove dangerous if pursued too aggressively. I maintained the demeanor of a loyal battle brother, reporting the facts of his experience, while internally calculating the probabilities associated with various response strategies. The truth would serve better than deception, provided it was presented in terms that aligned with existing chapter doctrine and imperial theology. "The Emperor protects, my lord," I replied, using the traditional formula that explained all inexplicable survivals. My brothers died as heroes, holding the line against corruption while I completed the mission. Their sacrifice enabled the recovery of sacred gene seed that might otherwise have been lost forever. Chapter Master Castor accepted this explanation, though his continued attention suggested that my case would be subject to ongoing observation and analysis. The suspicions were manageable as long as I maintained appropriate behavior and avoided actions that might reveal the extent of my transformation. Time would eventually allay their concerns as I demonstrated continued loyalty and effectiveness in service to the chapter. The integration of the enhanced gene seed into chapter operations required patience and subtlety. The samples were added to existing stocks without fanfare, their special properties masked by the random variations that naturally occurred in genetic material. The first aspirants created using the modified gene seed appeared entirely normal, though careful observation revealed subtle improvements in their capabilities and adaptability. These improvements accumulated over successive generations of new Space Marines, each batch slightly superior to their predecessors in ways that could be attributed to improved selection criteria and training methodologies. The changes were gradual enough to avoid triggering institutional resistance, but significant enough to enhance the chapter's overall effectiveness in combat operations. I was assigned to training duties, a role that provided opportunities to influence the development of enhanced Astartes while contributing my experience to the preparation of future warriors. The position also allowed me to identify candidates whose psychological profiles made them suitable for more direct forms of enhancement, individuals who might eventually be ready to learn the full truth about human potential and the changes required to achieve it. Brother Sergeant Maximos proved to be one such candidate, a veteran of 30 years' service whose tactical acumen and leadership capabilities had earned him recognition throughout the chapter. His recent assignment to the fortress's Strategic Planning Division provided access to information about Imperial military operations across the sector, knowledge that would prove invaluable for coordinating future enhancement initiatives. I began his preparation through casual conversations about the nature of warfare and the challenges facing the Imperium in its struggle against the galaxy's numerous threats. His responses revealed a mind capable of thinking beyond conventional limitations, someone who could appreciate the necessity of revolutionary change while remaining committed to core Imperial values. "We fight the same battles over and over," he observed during one of our discussions about recent campaign reports. "Different worlds, different enemies, but the same fundamental conflicts that our predecessors faced 1,000 years ago. We react to threats instead of addressing their underlying causes." His analysis was perceptive but incomplete, limited by the information available to baseline human consciousness. I provided additional context that helped him understand the systemic nature of the problems he had identified, the way that human limitations created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit regardless of tactical or technological superiority. "What if the fundamental limitation is humanity itself?" I asked, presenting the question as philosophical speculation rather than practical possibility. "What if our biology and psychology prevent us from achieving the kind of evolutionary advancement that would make such threats irrelevant?" The conversation continued over several sessions, each one building upon previous insights while gradually introducing concepts that challenged traditional assumptions about human nature and potential. Maximos proved receptive to these ideas, his analytical mind capable of following logical chains of reasoning even when they led to uncomfortable conclusions. The breakthrough came when I showed him classified information about genetic enhancement programs that had been attempted throughout Imperial history, projects that had achieved remarkable results before being terminated due to political or religious concerns. The data demonstrated that human modification was not only possible, but had been successfully implemented on numerous occasions, though never on the scale necessary to produce lasting benefits. These programs failed because they tried to change too much too quickly, I explained, sharing insights that drew upon knowledge gained during my transformation aboard the Space Hulk. Human nature resists dramatic alterations, but it can adapt to gradual improvements that preserve essential characteristics while expanding capabilities. Maximos understood the implications immediately, his enhanced intellect making connections that would have eluded baseline human thinking. The conversation that followed lasted several hours and covered topics that went far beyond anything included in standard Imperial doctrine or chapter teachings. By its conclusion, he was ready to learn the truth about my experiences aboard the Space Hulk and the nature of the changes that were already beginning to transform the chapter. I showed him evidence of the enhanced gene seed's effects on recent aspirants, improvements that could be measured and verified through careful observation and testing. His transformation began that same day, though the process was far more gradual and controlled than what I had experienced. The techniques developed aboard the Space Hulk had been refined through application to thousands of subjects, creating procedures that could enhance human capabilities while preserving psychological stability and individual identity. The changes in Maximos were subtle at first, improvements in reaction time and analytical capability that could be attributed to intensive training and experience. But over the course of weeks, his enhancements became more apparent to those who knew what to observe. His strategic planning abilities exceeded anything achievable through conventional means, his understanding of complex systems approaching the kind of intuitive comprehension that characterized enhanced consciousness. More importantly, he began to identify other candidates suitable for transformation, individuals whose psychological profiles and demonstrated capabilities made them potential assets for the expanding network of enhanced Astartes. The selection process required careful analysis of personality traits, command relationships, and access to sensitive information. But gradually we assembled a core group of battle brothers who could begin the process of systematic chapter improvement. The work proceeded slowly, constrained by the need to maintain secrecy and avoid triggering institutional immune responses that might eliminate enhanced personnel before they could establish themselves. Each transformation required months of preparation and careful monitoring, but the results justified the investment in time and resources. Enhanced Space Marines proved superior to their baseline counterparts in virtually every measurable category. Their combat effectiveness increased by margins that exceeded statistical variation. Their tactical decision-making incorporated variables and considerations that baseline consciousness could not process. Most importantly, their psychological resilience allowed them to function in environments and situations that would break normal Astartes. Within 2 years, enhanced personnel occupied key positions throughout the chapter's command structure, though their true nature remained concealed from those not yet ready for transformation. The improvements in overall chapter effectiveness were attributed to better training methods and strategic innovations, explanations that satisfied scrutiny from external observers while concealing the revolutionary nature of what was actually taking place. The success of the initial enhancement program provided a model that could be replicated across other Imperial institutions, though expansion required careful coordination and long-term planning. Each new target organization needed to be analyzed for structural vulnerabilities and recruitment opportunities, then systematically infiltrated by enhanced individuals who could begin the transformation process from within. The Imperial Guard regiment assigned to Inwit as a garrison force provided the first opportunity for expansion beyond the chapter. The regiment's commanding officer, General Voss, was a competent leader whose strategic thinking had been honed by decades of combat experience across multiple theaters. His access to Guard command networks and supply chains made him an ideal candidate for enhancement, provided the transformation could be accomplished without alerting his superiors or compromising his operational effectiveness. The approach required different techniques than those used for Space Marines. Modifications to the basic enhancement protocols that accounted for baseline human physiology and psychology. The changes had to be subtle enough to escape medical detection while still providing meaningful improvements in capability and understanding. General Voss was recruited through a carefully orchestrated series of tactical consultations with enhanced chapter personnel, exposing him to strategic concepts and analytical methods that gradually expanded his thinking beyond conventional limitations. The process took months, but eventually he reached the point where he could appreciate the benefits of controlled human enhancement and was willing to undergo the transformation voluntarily. His enhancement provided access to Imperial Guard command networks that spanned dozens of worlds, communication channels that could be used to identify and recruit suitable candidates throughout the sector. The process of systematic infiltration and enhancement could now expand beyond a single chapter to encompass entire military organizations. Similar approaches proved effective with administratum officials, adeptus mechanicus tech priests, and even some members of the ecclesiarchy whose theological flexibility allowed them to accept enhancement as a manifestation of the emperor's will rather than heretical corruption. Each successful recruitment provided access to new networks and resources that accelerated the expansion process. The transformation of human civilization was proceeding ahead of schedule, though the process remained invisible to those who lacked the enhanced perception necessary to recognize the changes taking place. To baseline human awareness, the improvements in military effectiveness and administrative efficiency appeared to result from better training, improved equipment, and natural evolutionary pressure. The true cause remained concealed behind layers of misdirection and institutional inertia, but concealment would not remain possible indefinitely. Eventually, the accumulation of enhanced individuals would reach critical mass, creating a network of modified humans whose collective capabilities exceeded those of the baseline population by margins too large to hide. The transition from covert enhancement to open transformation would require careful management to prevent panic and institutional collapse. The challenge was complicated by the diverse nature of imperial institutions and the varying levels of resistance that different organizations would offer to revolutionary change. Some, like the Adeptus Mechanicus, might welcome enhancement as a logical extension of their existing practices. Others, particularly within the ecclesiarchy, might view it as heretical corruption that needed to be eliminated by any means necessary. The solution required a coordinated revelation that would present enhancement as the natural evolution of human capability under the Emperor's guidance, rather than alien corruption or technological heresy. The narrative needed to demonstrate continuity with existing imperial doctrine while acknowledging the revolutionary nature of what was being proposed. Brother Maximos, whose analytical capabilities had been enhanced beyond anything achievable through conventional means, developed the strategic framework for managing this transition. His plan incorporated elements of gradual revelation, selective demonstration, and careful timing that would minimize resistance while maximizing acceptance of the new reality. The first phase involved establishing enhancement programs within key imperial institutions, creating networks of modified personnel who could provide mutual support and coordinate responses to potential opposition. This phase was already well underway, with enhanced individuals occupying influential positions throughout the sector's military and administrative hierarchies. The second phase would involve controlled demonstrations of enhanced capabilities, carefully staged events that would prove the benefits of human modification while maintaining the fiction that such capabilities resulted from improved training or divine blessing. These demonstrations would gradually expand public awareness of human potential while building acceptance for more dramatic changes. The final phase would involve open acknowledgement of the enhancement process and systematic transformation of entire populations, beginning with military organizations and administrative centers before expanding to civilian communities. This phase would require unprecedented coordination between enhanced individuals across multiple institutions. But the benefits to human civilization would justify the complexity and risks involved. I have been preparing for this final phase for 3 years now, using my position within the chapter to identify and recruit individuals capable of managing the transition from covert to open enhancement programs. The network we have built extends far beyond Inwit, reaching into imperial institutions throughout the sector and providing the coordination mechanisms necessary for system-wide transformation. The time for revelation is approaching. Too many enhanced individuals now exist within imperial institutions for the secret to remain hidden much longer. Medical examinations are becoming more sophisticated, analytical techniques more capable of detecting the cellular and genetic modifications that mark enhanced personnel. Within months, possibly weeks, someone will discover evidence that cannot be explained through conventional means. When that moment arrives, we must be ready to guide the response rather than react to it. The narrative of enhancement as evolutionary advancement must be established before opposition forces can organize effective resistance. The benefits of modification must be demonstrated clearly enough to overcome religious and institutional prejudices that might otherwise prevent rational consideration of the options. I have been tasked with preparing the initial revelation for the Imperial Fists chapter, a demonstration that will prove the reality of human enhancement while establishing the framework for broader acceptance throughout Imperial space. The timing must be precise, coordinated with similar revelations occurring simultaneously across multiple institutions to prevent any single organization from being isolated and eliminated. The demonstration will take place during the chapter's upcoming recruitment trials, events that attract observers from across the sector and provide opportunities for wide dissemination of information. Enhanced aspirants will display capabilities that exceed normal human potential by margins too large to be explained through conventional training or selection criteria. The revelation will be carefully managed to present enhancement as the culmination of Space Marine development, rather than a fundamental departure from established practices. The enhanced gene seed will be described as a recovered relic from the Great Crusade, genetic material blessed by the Emperor himself and preserved for use when humanity was ready to receive its gifts. This narrative has the advantage of being literally true, though it omits details about the source of the enhanced gene seed and the methods used to recover it. The Space Hulk Throne's lament had indeed contained genetic material dating from the Great Crusade, though that material had been improved through techniques that transcended conventional understanding of biological modification. The success of this demonstration will determine the pace and scope of future enhancement operations. Positive responses will enable accelerated transformation of Imperial institutions, while significant resistance will require more gradual approaches that minimize the risk of violent opposition. But regardless of the immediate response, the process of human enhancement cannot be stopped or reversed. Too many individuals have already been transformed. Too many institutions have been infiltrated by enhanced personnel. The network of modified humans has achieved sufficient size and complexity to sustain itself even in the face of systematic opposition. The future of humanity will be determined by enhanced individuals whose capabilities exceed those of baseline humans by orders of magnitude. The civilization that emerges from this transformation will retain the essential values and traditions that have sustained the Imperium through 10 millennia of struggle, but it will be capable of achieving goals that were previously impossible. The Emperor's vision of human dominance over the galaxy will finally be realized, not through the crude application of military force, but through the systematic improvement of human capability, until no alien threat or heretical corruption can challenge our supremacy. The enhanced humans who inherit this galaxy will be worthy successors to the species that began its journey on the distant world of Terra, but they will possess the strength and wisdom necessary to complete that journey successfully. I have been trapped on a Space Hulk for 47 days, but that imprisonment has led to liberation beyond anything I could have imagined during my previous existence as a baseline Space Marine. The transformation that began in the organic corridors of the Throne's Lament will continue until every human being has been given the opportunity to transcend their biological limitations and achieve their full potential. This is not the end of humanity, but its beginning. Not corruption, but purification. Not death, but rebirth into something greater than what we were. The Emperor protects, and his protection takes forms that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. Soon, all of humanity will understand the true nature of his gift and embrace the future he has prepared for his chosen species. The revelation begins tomorrow. The transformation of the galaxy starts now.